Hi everyone, welcome back to Nomad Nation Shop Talk. I'm Dave, and with me today is Brantley, the owner of this 2012 Jeep JKU. This is the beginning of a three-part series on routine maintenance. We're going to be talking about oil changes, lubricating the chassis and suspension, and we're going to touch a little bit on air filters. Be sure and subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. But first, let's roll the intro. All right, so before we begin, Brantley, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Jeep?
It's a 2012 JKU. We bought it back when we still lived in Florida, about 6 years ago. And ever since then, it's been a work in progress.
All right, good. So it wasn't like this when you bought it.
No, it looked radically different.
Yeah.
It looked radically different. We've done a lot of modifications over the years. It's been a work in progress. So our first modification was tossing on a 2.5-inch Terraflex spring lift, some lower front control arms, and 35-inch Mickey Thompsons. And that lasted us for about 4.5, 5 years. And just in the past 6 months, we've increased the lift from 2.5-inch Terraflex to a 3.5-inch rock crawler. Done some stuff with aftermarket tie rods, drag link flip, new Fox shocks with reservoirs, 37-inch tires. It's definitely gotten a little bit taller, and my wife is having a little bit more trouble getting into it these days.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about these stickers that I see on there.
Oh, the skeleton arm.
Yeah.
Yeah, a really exciting movie came out around the same time we bought the Jeep, and that was Mad Max Fury Road. And Charlize Theron's character, Furiosa, she drives what's called the War Rig. And if you watch the film, there's a skeleton arm on the side of her driver door.
I think I remember that.
And had some custom stickers made for the Jeep. And that skeleton arm and the War Rig emblems have been on this Jeep since day one. It's fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody personalizes their Jeeps their own way,
Yep.
and that's
Ours
one of the
has
great things.
ours has a skeleton arm.
Yeah,
So
no, that's what I've never seen anything like that before. That's it's a nice feature.
yeah, we get some looks on the side of the road.
Do you do your own maintenance, or do you take it?
I've always done my own maintenance. And like the dealership that we bought it from, they of course offered to do maintenance for a year, but they were a 3-hour drive for us. So
when you do, what kind of oil do you like to use?
it's varied over the years. Initially, that was Mobil 1. All the forums that I read said Mobil 1's great, go with Mobil 1. But over the past 2 years, I would say we've transitioned from Mobil 1 to Royal Purple just because of reputation. And a lot of people that I know and trust in the Jeep community, they've recommended it highly. I know you recommended it to me. Mm-hmm. So we've been using Royal Purple. My daughter, she's 8. She likes to help with oil changes, and she's thrilled whenever she sees the purple come out.
Yeah.
She thinks that's cool. And she brags to her friends in 3rd grade that we use purple oil in our Jeep.
Today, what we really want to talk to everyone about is the importance of basic maintenance. And it doesn't get any more basic than the oil change. Whether you take it to a shop like mine or you do it yourself in your driveway or your garage, it's one of the most important things you can do to maintain a healthy vehicle. Everybody knows that you need to have an oil change. Every vehicle owner out there, regardless of what you drive, we all know that you have to change the oil.
Yeah. But the question is, what oil do you use and how often do you change the oil? Because the manual could say 3,000, 5,000, 8,000, 15,000 or more. So like I have a lot of those questions still.
Yeah. And here at the shop, we preach manufacturer recommended intervals. I don't really care what the bottle says. Mm-hmm. I don't care what their TV commercials say. Follow your manufacturer's recommended intervals for your oil change.
But like there for a while, I was using a certain brand, and it was advertising 15,000 miles extended life, and you don't have to change your oil for 15,000 miles. If I go with that kind of oil and I'm paying a premium for the extended life oil, is it safe to wait that long?
According to the manufacturer, yes, because I would like to think that they wouldn't put that on their bottle if it wasn't true. But honestly, there's different additives, different detergents, things that they put in there, some proprietary information that we don't know.
It's just
why
magic.
It does
it's
what
magic.
it does. It's magic.
Do those manufacturers understand that we're driving Jeeps and we're driving those vehicles a certain way?
No, they do not. So that's very generic. And things like that are a lot like, for those of you out there like me that like to fish, especially bass fishing, sometimes lures are designed to catch fishermen. Mm-hmm. similar lines, I think. But
I've been a victim of nice looking lures.
Yeah,
That didn't do a thing.
Yeah, so really, there's some good to the long life, but for us, if you drive well, we've got two of them sitting here, so we'll just talk about JK's. 5,000 miles. Every 5,000 miles
Change that
of
oil.
regular driving, change the oil.
Now you said regular driving.
Mm-hmm.
So mine is, I call it a weekend warrior, but let's be honest, it's more like a bi-monthly warrior, which means like I daily drive it in the city on I-70 every day of the week. And maybe once every 2 months, I can actually make it to a trail, whether that's S'more, Hot Springs, Frostbite, or some other place, and actually wheel it for about, maybe 2 days.
Yeah.
So if I'm driving my Jeep like that, is 5,000 miles okay? Can I go a little bit longer? Should I go a little bit less? Like, what's the rule of thumb when you're taking it off-road?
In my experience, and this is kind of what I use to determine that, Jeep miles are similar to dog years. When you off-road, for every 1 mile, you're probably putting about 7 miles on that Jeep. If you're hardcore wheeling it, even if you're going through the mud, if you're climbing rocks, even kind of moderate to even some of the more beginner, you're in 4 low, you're putting a lot of stress on the powertrain, and that motor, even though you're crawling at 2, 3, 4 miles an hour, you are putting that strain on that additional strain on that motor, especially in the summer months
when it gets hot.
Yeah. And as we all know, JKs have a tendency to run a little bit hotter than some of the previous models.
Yeah. And sometimes when you're on the trail, you're not even going 2 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You're just at a standstill, and you've got it in park on a very hot day, half sitting in a creek, half hanging off of a rock, just waiting for all the rigs in front of you to get up the trail so that you can go. At
a 30-degree incline, and that actually does. I mean, all that oil, it's the oil pump has to work a little harder. It's pumping all that oil through the system.
Yeah.
And so that's what, on my 2017, I wheel a lot. Well, I try to anyways.
You wheel a lot more than I do.
Yeah. So I that's what I do is about a 1-to-7 ratio for every mile on the trail.
That's
I calculate about 7 miles of normal driving. I do my oil changes about every 4,500 miles, anywhere between 35 and 4,500, depending on where I'm at.
Yeah.
If we're making a trip, because I don't typically trailer my Jeep.
Yeah.
So when we go to places like Hot Springs, 6-7 hours away, I do an oil change before. And last time we were there for several days. I did an oil change when I got home.
Really? So you left, 6-hour drive down, you wheeled for 2 or 3 days, drove back up, another oil change.
Yep.
That was probably right around 1,000 miles or less that you put on it.
Yep.
Okay.
And in a future video.
And you feel like that was necessary?
I did.
Okay.
I did. Because in a future video, you'll see why, because we have footage of that trip.
Okay.
So we'll be putting that in. You'll understand why.
So we'll see the abuse you put your Jeep through.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Mud costs money. Keep that in mind.
I don't like mud.
I try to stay out of it, but sometimes
it's necessary.
You just can't help it. It used to be when I first got mine and first built it, because I bought mine bone stock. I mean, it was bone stock. And when I first built that thing, the very first thing that I broke was my radiator, because we were at Kansas Rocks.
Okay.
Nope, it happened at Tuttle Creek.
Tuttle, okay.
Yeah, it happened at Tuttle Creek.
A lot of bad things happen at Tuttle.
And for those of you out there that have been to Tuttle Creek, you could probably relate to this a little bit. So we're crawling along this trail, and I look over to the right, and I see a giant, what turned out to be a giant pit of mud. And I was literally cruising by, and I looked over, and I was like, mud pit. And before my brain could say no, I was already down it. And I mean, I submarined that thing, and it was so much fun. My kids were laughing. I mean, we had another buddy of mine and they stopped because they're smarter than I am, to wait to see if I not only made it through, but what happened when I did. So I made it through. However, what I didn't realize is underneath that 3 foot of water was a giant mound of mud. And I mean, I just bulldozed that whole thing, and it clogged up my my radiator was shot. We started to overheat on the way home. Anyway, long story short, I also changed my oil after that incident as well. So new radiator, and everything's fine, but mud costs money. And what happens is that mud and sediment and stuff can actually, even though it's technically sealed, it can still work its way in. It can still work its way in. So,
so like I mentioned that I use Royal Purple now based off your recommendation. You obviously use it for your rigs.
I do.
What do you use here in the shop?
Royal Purple is what we recommend, and that's what we use.
Okay, so aside from my daughter liking the color, why else should we consider Royal Purple?
For a number of reasons. The main reason is, and this is part of that proprietary information, I wish I could explain how it works better, but it has additives and detergents that actually help clean the motor and the components as it's running. It helps keep the carbon deposits from building up. And I have run extensive tests on my own vehicles.
You've done science.
Yes, I have done science. And on my trucks, on my Jeeps, and I have noticed a difference. When you use Royal Purple, your mileage will improve.
Which can justify bigger tires.
Which can, you want to go to 37s, come on in. We'll be glad to help you save some money on your oil change, and then we can put it towards your
some 37s.
some 37-inch tires. So yeah, just running all the major brands. I mean, I did apples to apples comparisons. Mobile One, several other brands where I would just run through oil changes, and my driving habits, especially on my pickup truck, are pretty much the same. Towing my boat, towing a trailer, under load.
Yeah.
I've just noticed Royal Purple the engine noise has actually gone down.
It's gone down.
So that's another benefit. And like I said, I can't explain why, because I don't know, because they keep that a pretty hush-hush. Their additive and detergent we don't know what it is, but it does work.
Yeah. Now you mentioned engine noise, and I spend a lot of my late nights when I can't fall asleep on Jeep forums online and just reading through all the comments. And one of the things I've looked up in the past was just like, engine noise, because the 3.6, which is in the JK from 2012 up to, well, even
28,
even in
now,
the JLs.
Even the JLs and the JTs.
It has a tendency to get noisy. And what I've read is that, and of course, like some of the JKs, depending on what year you get and when it was manufactured in that year, your oil cap in the engine bay, it could say 5W30 or it could say 5W20. Well, first of all, before I ask my next question, like, why is there a difference? It's the same vehicle. It's the same engine.
It's not the same engine.
But it's a 3.6.
It's a 3.6, but it's not the same engine. So some of the internal components changed, and the manufacturer decided that because of this, the viscosity needed to change.
So I've run both viscosities in my Jeep. During the summer months and the hotter months, I'll run one viscosity, and then the colder months, I'll run a different one. Is that okay, even though the cap calls for this specific viscosity?
It's fine, and a lot of people do that. In our part of the country, in the Midwest, where the temperature can fluctuate from 70 degrees in the afternoon till, I think, it's supposed to get down into the 30s tonight.
Yeah. But I mean, like, we had a day about a month ago where it was 68 degrees. And then 4 hours later, it was, I think, right around 5 degrees.
Yeah.
And that's not Celsius. That's like 5 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that's actually, So honestly, what we recommend is just stay with the manufacturer recommended, unless you live in like if you live in Death Valley, you might want to consider using a little higher viscosity on your oil. But by and large, for normal everyday driving in most parts of the country, just use what's recommended.
Just go with that.
Some people think that higher oil viscosity or a higher oil weight will help oil pressure.
Or quiet the engine a
or
little bit.
quiet the engine. That it does, but what happens is you start masking the actual problem.
Okay.
So we've had customers in here that have had low oil pressure. It was the oil pump, but they were actually using Rotella. I don't remember what weight they were putting in, but they were using the Rotella diesel oil. So really high weight.
Okay.
So it bumped up their oil pressure because it was thicker oil.
Mhm.
But the problem is the oil pump was still struggling. The oil pump was going out. And so instead of having us replace the oil pump, which is what we recommended, they just kept using the higher weight oil. And now they're going to be in here for a motor swap because
it started with that.
So using different types of oil, different weights, it doesn't hurt anything.
Unless you go extreme.
Obviously, you don't want to use too light of an oil.
Yeah.
But, in the wintertime, it probably won't hurt you as bad. But it's always best just to stay with the manufacturer recommendation.
Yeah.
Modifying a vehicle, any vehicle, is going to affect performance. It's going to affect how hard the engine works. And putting on 37-inch tires makes your engine work a little harder.
Yeah.
Even if you put the programmer on it, change your shift points, adjust for your tire size and your gear ratio, it still puts stress and strain on that motor that was not originally intended by the manufacturer. So those are things to take into consideration when you're doing maintenance or having your maintenance done. But like I said, always, if you're not sure, look in the manual, look in your owner's manual, look on the oil cap, use your manufacturer's recommended oil. That's what we recommend.
Yeah. Now, what about oil filters?
Filters, we here use a premium filter simply because the material, the paper material, is much higher quality.
Yeah.
It catches more of the metal deposits. Because regardless of what kind of oil you use, regardless of how often you change your oil, regardless of how much you baby your Jeep when you're not beating the tar out of it, it's metal on metal.
Yeah.
You're lubricating metal on metal. You're always going to have metal deposits. Microscopic, you can't really see them, but they're there. That's what causes the damage to your valves, to your pistons, to your and if you'll bear with me just a second, I want to go get something and show you what can happen to a neglected engine. I'll be right back. So we have a customer where we're doing a motor swap. The motor was completely seized.
Yeah.
When we pulled the motor out, started inspecting it a little bit, we pulled the oil pan and found this in the bottom of the oil pan. Actually, it was lodged in the bottom of the oil pan. So this was one of their pistons. Was one of their pistons.
It doesn't look like a whole piston.
It is not a whole piston. So what had happened was the engine seized up and it put so much pressure on it that it actually snapped the piston, broke these chunks off, and pushed it out, and it landed down in the bottom of the oil pan.
And what was like the root cause of that happening?
One of the root causes was neglect.
Just not adhering to a maintenance schedule?
Yeah, maintenance neglect. Yep. So spending $100 on an oil change or whatever, this turned into $4,900 for a new motor.
Yeah.
And we're putting a new motor in. But unfortunately, this was a hard lesson learned.
Yeah. And
as these parts wear out, regardless, whatever oil you use, whatever quality, whether it's Royal Purple or Mobil 1 or any oil, your engine's going to wear out. These parts are designed to wear out. They're wear parts. You can't help it. Push rods, piston rings, I mean, they wear out.
It's not a question of if, just a question of when.
It's a question of when. And to increase the longevity of the life of your vehicle, do your regular maintenance. Have it done somewhere. If you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself or you don't have time, take it to a reputable place and have it done.
Yeah.
One of the most important things you can do.
Yeah.
Usually preventative maintenance, you can't see the end result. You can't see that. It's not like, oh my gosh, my engine blew and you spend $5,000 on having a new engine put in. You can see the end result.
Yeah.
Doing your oil change, you can't see the end result. But the other thing that's really important about doing an regular maintenance is if you have a good mechanic and you take it someplace, that can actually be a telltale sign of something to come. And we had a vehicle in here not that long ago. It had valve cover gaskets and an oil pan leak. That's the customer came in complaining of these leaks. So we tracked them down, figured out. As we drained the oil, we noticed that it was coming out almost to the consistency of this coffee that we're drinking. And that raised a red flag. It was discolored. It smelled funny.
Yeah.
But the main thing is when we saw it coming out, it was almost water consistency. So we drained the oil out, we put in fresh oil, and then we ran a couple of different tests, including a coolant system pressure test. Come to find out, they had a bad head gasket. The typical indications of the bad head gasket it wasn't idling terribly rough. It wasn't overheating. It was running hotter than it should have been, as it turned out, but it wasn't overheating. So there wasn't a telltale sign. But when we did start it back up again, we noticed, because it was cold at the time, when we brought it into the shop, when we started it back up after we put the new oil in, the white smoke was coming out. So that was another clear indication that, well, in the wintertime, your average vehicle owner is not going to notice white smoke coming out of the tailpipe when it's 15 degrees outside. Yeah. Because it's already coming out that way. So unfortunately, we had to call the customer and deliver the bad news that, okay, this job just turned into a little bit bigger of a job because we have to replace your head gaskets.
And maintenance, it's easy maintenance if you're shown how to do it. I remember being shown how to change oil in my first vehicle ever, which was a 1987 Dodge Caravan. It was blue with wood grain, and it barely even ran. But I was taught at 15 how to change oil, and because someone showed me how to do it, I realized how simple it is. And over the years, I've always changed my own oil, and it's never been easier than with that JK, especially now that it's lifted, because I can just crawl underneath there, and it is super easy. If I can change my oil in maybe 10 minutes flat. So before we throw my Jeep on the rack and we actually start doing the oil change and demonstrate to everyone at home, this is how you can do an oil change on your JK, is there anything else you wanted to add about oil maintenance?
Don't mix oils.
What do you mean, like brands or viscosities?
Brands, even viscosities is okay, but if you're using in the JKs and most newer vehicles, full synthetic is what's recommended.
Okay.
Don't ever mix a conventional oil with a synthetic oil because it's a different chemical makeup and they actually won't bond together, and so they're fighting against one another. And rather than it lubricating your engine, it will actually cause harm to the engine. Don't ever mix conventional with synthetic oil.
Just don't do it.
Regardless of the situation.
Okay.
Because you can actually cause pretty serious damage.
Gotcha. All right, so we're going to put that thing up on the lift, do an oil change.
Yep.
All right, awesome. So you're going to walk us through the whole entire process.
Yep, we'll go through the whole process.
Super simple, and anyone can do it.
Anybody can do it.
I like it. All right, let's get started.
Okay. All right, everyone, we've got Brantley's 2012 Jeep JKU. We're about to do the oil change, take you through step by step. So the first thing you want to do is obviously remove the cover. It just pops right off. It's got these spots here that marry up. They just snap into place using these two spots here. This one lines up here. And This one lines up right here. So it's easy to take on and off. There's no screws or bolts. And the very first thing that you need to do is remove the oil filter cap. The reason for that is because you want to let the oil that's up top drain down into the sump because it's pumped up in through the filter. And if you don't do that, if you don't release that pressure, you're not going to drain all the oil. So you might have, up to half a quart more of oil up top in the cooler and in the filter housing itself, and you might wind up overfilling it. So using a 24 millimeter socket with an extension, you simply take that cap loose. And it's also important to remember that when you're doing your oil change, you want to keep it on a level surface and you want to have the engine at operating temperature. That way you ensure you get all of your oil viscosity. It gets a little thinner, and so it will drain more complete. So you pull the old filter out with the cap, and there you have it. It's important that you also make sure that this O-ring comes out, because we're going to replace this with the new filter. Your new filter will come with it, so we're going to take that off and we're going to put the new one on. For those of you at home, having a good drain pan with a good funnel is, that's probably more ideal. For our purposes, we're going to put it up on the lift, so we're going to use our oil catch pan that we use here at the shop. Having one of these little picks is real handy to get that O-ring off. So you just simply put your pick underneath there and it peels right off. Don't throw it out yet. And then you can just set your cap off to the side. So as you can see, filter and the new O-ring. So now that we've got the cap off there, we're going to raise it up and we're going to drain the oil. So now we're going to drain the oil from the oil pan. It's important that when you're doing this at home in your garage or in your driveway, you keep the vehicle level. You don't want to raise just the front or the back because the way that the oil will drain, you want to make sure you get as much of it out as you can. And if it's up in the corners or if it's up in the front, it may not all drain. So you want to keep it level. If you can't get all the way underneath your vehicle, and you do find that you have to lift it up, make sure that you get quality jack stands and place them in the appropriate places so that you can safely elevate the vehicle and still work underneath it. You can refer to the manufacturer's recommendations for the correct place to put your jack stands. So we're going to get underneath here. For this part, you'll need a 13 millimeter socket or a wrench to pull the pan plug. So when you're using your catch pan at home, you want to make sure that you set it just enough, a little bit forward to where the plug's at, because the oil's actually going to come shooting out a little bit. So you want to make sure that you're ready to catch it. For this particular purpose, normally we would have this pretty much right up here, but so you guys at home can see what we're doing, we're going to leave it down just a little bit. All right, so your oil pan drain plug is here. If you have skid plates, there's typically some kind of a bolted access panel or something like that where you would take that off first. Brantley does not have skid plates on here, so the oil pan plug is exposed. So we just take that off. So you want to get it to where it's just barely coming out just like this. It's slowed down. It's almost at a drip. So we're going to put our plug back in. And you always want to make sure and tighten down your plug completely before you leave the underside of your vehicle, so that way you know it's done. These require 20 foot-pounds of torque, and we're going to go get our torque wrench, and we're going to make sure it's nice and tight. So for those of you at home that are doing this, for about the cost of an oil change, you can get all the tools that you need if you shop a little savvy. These particular torque wrenches are from Harbor Freight. They're not really great for the professional mechanic, but for a home mechanic, they're perfect. They're about 20 bucks a piece. They come pre-calibrated, and they'll work pretty well. So you'll need a 3/8 drive and a 1/2-inch drive, simply because your 24 mil for your oil filter cap typically going to be a 1/2-inch drive socket. So to adjust this particular torque wrench to the 20 foot-pounds required for the plug, you undo the set screw. And right now, we're set at 10 pounds, so we want to get up here to 20. And in order to do that, you turn it clockwise until you reach this part right where the line that leads down to the 20, from the 20, leads up to the vertical line. And you line it up with the 0 right there. And now we're set at 20 pounds. Turn that lock nut so that it's tight. We're going to lock it down. Then we come back under here. So now that we've got our drain plug hand tight, we're going to move this out of the way. We've got our torque wrench set to 20 foot-pounds. We're going to put it on there, and we're going to crank it until we hear the torque wrench click. Once the torque wrench clicks, then you know you're set at 20. You may not have been able to hear it, but it did click. So we're at 20 foot-pounds right there, so we know we're ready to go. All right, so now we're getting ready to put our oil filter in, our new one. Like I said before, you want to make sure that you have your new O-ring. So you just take the new O-ring and you slide it over the threads, and you want to seat it into the large gap at the top between the lip and where the threads begin. Just like that. And it's always a good idea to take a little new oil and coat the outside of the O-ring so that when you screw it back in there, it helps prevent damage. The oil filters are directional, so you want to make sure that this crown, it actually snaps in place inside of that, the top of the cap. So when you put it in, you want to make sure that you get it in there and it clicks into place. So now you can move the filter around without worrying about dropping it or improperly seating it. You want to get your oil filter in there, and you want to screw it down until you can't really get it anymore. You want to do about hand tight. You don't want to over tighten this, because if you do, you can crack the cap, you can crack the housing. And if you do that, then you've got a whole other problem, because the oil filter housing and the oil cooler, which sits down below the upper intake, are one piece. So if you crack that oil filter housing or the cap or damage the oil cooler by over tightening it, you have to have this whole entire unit replaced. So we get it on as tight as we can by hand. So we've got a 1/2-inch drive torque wrench with our 24 millimeter socket on there and an extension. We have it set for 18 foot-pounds, which is what's required to seat that cap properly. So nice and easy. You want to make sure that you get it down to where it's snug. Once it's snug, so right there, we're going to stop, and you just want to slowly pull until you feel and hear it, the torque wrench click. There's your click, 18 pounds. That's all you want to go. Don't go any more than that. And now your filter is installed. Now we're getting ready to fill it back up with oil. So you start by removing the cap. But before we do, I want to show you, always follow the manufacturer recommended oil weight. It's typically printed on the top of the oil cap. If it's not or it's worn out, consult your owner's manual. But on the 2012s with a 3.6, it is the 5W30. So first you want to get your funnel. This is the standard red Jeep JK funnel. If you're using any other funnel except this one, you're doing it wrong. Just kidding. Use whatever funnel you want. Use a soda can, bottle. No, don't do that. So obviously you put it in there. And for this 3.6, it takes 6 quarts of oil. Typically what we do here is we will dump in about 5.5 quarts. We'll stop, let it drain down to the bottom of the pan. We'll start it, let it run for a minute, and then check it again. Because sometimes you have a little bit of residual oil in there and you don't want to accidentally overfill it. So it's really just a way to double check to make sure you're not putting too much oil in your engine, which can cause damage. It can damage seals. It can build up a little too much pressure. And cause you a whole host of problems. And let's face it, the way a lot of us drive these things, we create our own problems. So make it a little easier on yourself and just stop and check. Let's do a nice even pour so you don't overflow your funnel. That's why we have this bigger funnel when you're using the 5-quart jugs. It's a little bit easier and you run less of a risk of it overfilling or overflowing. Okay. So there's a couple of ways you can go about this. You buy the 5-quart jug plus a quart, or it's a little cheaper if you just buy a couple of 5-quart jugs and just keep buying. The per quart price for retail is a little less buying it by the jug. The catch is, I should say the trick is, you've got to be able to know how much of this to put in. So there's a little sight line in there. It shows it in liters and quarts. You want to make sure you're following the quarts. So from the top to the 4 is 1 quart. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put about half of this in there. Then we're going to put the cap back on. We're going to start it. We're going to shut it off. Let it set for a minute. We're going to check our oil level. And if required, we're going to add that little bit extra. So the best thing you can do is just pour a little bit at a time and just keep checking that little sight glass. That's about roughly half a quart right there. A little more. There we go. All right, so now we're going to set this off the side. We're going to pull our funnel out, put our cap back on, start it and check it. If necessary, we'll put some additional oil in there until it reaches the full line. On the dipstick. So now that we've filled the crankcase with about 5.5 quarts of oil, we've started it, ran it for a few seconds, made sure the oil pressure light went out. We're going to check it and see where the level is at, and if necessary, put a little bit more in there to get it up to the fill line. So you want to pull the dipstick and clean it off. Don't ever trust the first pull. Put it back in there. And so you can see All right, so as you can see, we put in 5.5 quarts just to double check. We're right here at the bottom of the mark. So ideally we want to get it up here. So we're a little low, about 1/2 quart. So we're going to dump that last 1/2 quart in, start it back up, check it one more time, and we should be finished. All right, so we're going to put in our last 1/2 quart. As you can see, well, we're right about here. So that's the top. We're about halfway down. We need to get to this line right there, and then it'll be full. Pour a little bit, stop, and check it. Still have a little bit more to go. So we're right about here, a little bit more to go. This is easier with just the single quart, but it is a little cheaper to buy it this way. So there we are right there. The bottle is level. We are right on the line. So we put that extra quart in. Now we're going to put the cap back on. We're going to restart it, let it run for a minute, shut it off, check the oil level. We should be good. All right, so we've added that extra 1/2 quart. So now we have our full 6 quarts in there. Started the engine, ran it for just a minute, made sure that the low oil pressure light went out, which it did. Pull the dipstick, clean it off, put it back, and we're going to check it one more time. And now, as you can see, we're right here in the middle of where these cross hatches are, which is the exact oil level that we need. You want to be about halfway up. If you have oil up here at the top, or even worse, past this lip right here, you've got too much in there. You probably need to drain a little bit out. So just be real careful and take your time filling it back up, and you should be good. So last thing we're going to do is put our cover back on. This spot right here, mates up there. This one right here. It can be a little tricky to get lined up. And then it pops right into place. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. This is the first episode in a 3-part series on maintenance. Hopefully it helped. Maybe you guys can try something new and tackle an oil change on yourself, save a little bit of money. And there's a little bit of pride in there when you get finished and, for a job well done. So if you have any questions or you need any help, drop us a comment, or you can email us at shoptalk@offroadnomads.net. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Take care, everybody. The last thing you want to do is put your cover back on. And then just remember, this mates up with this spot. This one, wait a minute. Damn it, take 2.